The city never really slept. It shimmered, always pretending to be alive, always chasing its own reflection. Every skyscraper was a mirror, every person inside a ghost of ambition, and somewhere among the clouds lived a man who had everything except the ability to feel it. Adrian Vale. People called him a visionary, a tycoon, the man who built a kingdom out of light and glass. But if you asked him what he believed in, he'd say results, not hearts, not people, just progress. Each morning, Adrian crossed the marble lobby of Vale Meridian, the crown jewel of his empire. He walked like the world should move out of his way. The lobby staff would look up, smile politely, then look down again. Because Adrian Vale didn't just walk through places, he passed through people. His office sat high above the skyline, an aquarium of light and silence, floor-to-ceiling windows that made the city look smaller, a desk too white to feel real, a pen so perfectly placed that even time seemed to follow its order. His assistant trailed behind, breath short, tablet glowing with unread messages. The board moved the equities call to 9, sir, and the foundation gala needs your keynote by noon. Adrian nodded without turning. His days were chessboards, and everyone around him, pieces. Even he didn't realize how much of himself he'd already sacrificed to the game. He looked out the window. The city below was obedient, neat, small, easy to control from 59 floors above. Down there, people looked like moving thoughts, tiny, scattered, replaceable. Up here, silence was the reward for power. Until that morning, when a simple sound cracked the rhythm of his perfect world. It came from the corridor outside the private lounge, the one where no one ever made mistakes, because mistakes weren't allowed. Adrian's head turned, just slightly, but it was enough to break the mirror of his routine. He stepped out, his footsteps cold and certain. On the white floor, a silver bucket lay on its side, water spreading fast across the marble, curling toward the polished logo of Vale Meridian. Kneeling beside it, pressing down a cloth with quick, trembling hands, was a young woman in a plain gray uniform. Her hair was tied neatly, her sleeves soaked halfway to the elbows. Her shoes looked like they'd walked miles they weren't paid for. But when she raised her eyes, just for a second, the entire corridor felt different. Her name, he didn't know it yet, was Mira. A maid, the kind of person people look past without meaning to. Invisible, except for the quiet order she left behind. You've spilled water on a reactive stone. That was how he said good morning. She blinked once, calm. The kind of calm that doesn't come from arrogance, but from endurance. I'm sorry, sir. I'll clean it up right away. She pressed the cloth harder, guiding the water back before it could touch the engraved letters of his empire's name. Her hands moved with precision, simple, unremarkable, yet strangely graceful. Make sure it doesn't happen again. She nodded. No excuses. Just quiet dignity. It unsettled him, how someone could bow without breaking. He turned and walked away. Busy men, after all, don't stop for small detours. But when he stepped back into his office, he noticed something strange. A small drop of water clinging to his shoe. It trailed across the marble, leaving a faint mark, a comet dissolving into nothing. And somewhere behind him, he heard the faint sound of a cloth wiping it away. The rest of the day unfolded the same as always. Contracts, phone calls, the clean rhythm of success. But her image kept returning, like a ghost reflected on every screen, every window. He told himself it was irritation. It wasn't. By noon, the board gathered for his keynote rehearsal. The conference lounge gleamed, polished shoes, perfect suits, and the sound of ambition rehearsing morality. Adrian read the script aloud. We build to honor human dignity. The words felt wrong in his mouth, like a tuxedo that didn't fit anymore. He cleared his throat, ready to start again. But then out of the corner of his eye, he noticed something. A window slightly open, a breeze brushing the stage curtain. And in that flickering light, by the corner plant, the same maid was there again. She was replacing a cracked vase with a plain glass jar. No announcement, no note, just quiet correction. "You, leave the staging area. Now." She froze, but didn't apologize this time. Instead, she looked at the floor, at the slight tilt leading toward the stage, and said, "Mira, it was unsafe. Someone could slip." No fear, no defiance, just truth. For a heartbeat too long, the man who ruled skyscrapers and the woman who cleaned them stood eye to eye, breathing the same fragile humility. He said nothing. She nodded once, rolled her card away, and disappeared, leaving behind air that felt cleaner than it had a right to be. The day pressed forward, meetings stacked like dominoes, but something in him had shifted. He began to notice things. Fingerprints along the stair rail, dust where a photo frame had been moved, a faint scent of lemon and soap lingering after silence. People talk about power like it builds kingdoms, but sometimes power is just the hand that keeps the world from collapsing quietly. That evening, the city turned gray and weightless. Rain fell against the tower like whispered apologies. Adrian stayed late, pretending work still meant control. But when he lifted his pen, his reflection trembled in the ink. The air felt heavier, and he realized the window latch beside him was still slightly open. He got up to close it, and saw, reflected in the glass, a figure moving in the hallway. It was her again, pushing her cart through the quiet corridors like a ship through the dark. She paused at each door, checked something, nodded, moved on. Precision without applause. He watched her reflection. He told himself it was curiosity, but something deeper was growing in the space between thought and feeling. He opened the door. "You work late." She turned startled, then smiled faintly. "Mira, the floors forgive better when no one's walking on them." There was poetry in her practicality. Maybe she didn't mean it as poetry, but truth often arrives disguised as simplicity. "What's your name?" "Mira." "Mira, sir." "How long have you been here?" "Mira, 3 months. Night shifts." He nodded, pretending it was routine small talk. But something about her steadiness anchored him. Her uniform was crisp, though worn at the edges. A small tear on the sleeve had been hand-stitched. Her hands, rough, scarred by work, moved like she was used to fixing things that weren't hers. And her eyes, they didn't look like a maid's eyes. They looked like someone who'd seen loss and chosen gentleness anyway. He returned to his desk, but couldn't focus. Numbers blurred into thoughts, and in the quiet, that line from his speech echoed again. "We build to honor human dignity." He looked at the city, and for once, he didn't see profits or power. He saw people. He saw her. Later that night, a senior partner stumbled out of the elevator, half drunk, half angry. His voice was too loud for the hour. He brushed past Mira's cart, hit the bucket, sent water splashing toward the floor outlet. She reacted instantly, hands down, stopping the spill with a folded rag, saving the line of wires from sparking. "Watch it." Before she could speak, Adrian appeared in the doorway, his tone cold, but his meaning warm. "You watch yourself. And the floor." It was nothing really, just a moment. But for Mira, it meant everything. A man like him, defending someone like her, with no audience, no purpose but decency. The partner muttered and walked off. Mira exhaled, her palms still pressed against the damp marble. "Mira, thank you. It's my building, Mira, and my floor." Something human passed between them then, small enough to miss, strong enough to stay. But the city wasn't done testing him, because the moment a heart starts to open, the world sends something to see if it's real. The next morning arrived in silver light and tension. Before sunrise, the news broke. An expose, Project Fenway. An old development under Vale Meridian's name. Accusations of fraud, displacement, backroom deals. Old ghosts, waking. Within an hour, his office filled with noise, lawyers, board members, PR advisors. Each one more nervous than the last. The same men who once praised his brilliance now questioned his conscience. He said nothing. He didn't defend himself. He just stood at the window, staring at a reflection that finally looked breakable. Down on the lower floors, Mira mopped the hall, unaware of headlines, but aware of pressure, the kind you feel in your bones when a storm is near. Buildings remember their creators, and this one, somehow, knew its maker was in pain. By noon, a protest had formed on the plaza, faces pressed against the glass, voices rising like rain before thunder. Signs with black letters, old wounds with new names. The PR team rehearsed his response. The security chief suggested a back exit. But Adrian didn't move. He just watched. A shadow crossed his view. Mira, in the lobby, laying down yellow caution signs where the rain had turned the tiles slick. Quiet, calm, careful. She didn't see a riot outside. She saw danger where people might fall, and fixed it. He stepped forward, ignoring everyone's warnings. Down to the lobby, down to her. Through the glass, the noise of the crowd blurred. Inside, there was only her, kneeling again, steady, graceful, real. A triangle of yellow plastic tipped over. He bent down, set it upright beside her. Their hands almost touched. For the first time in years, Adrian Vale felt something unplanned move through him. Not guilt, not fear, recognition. It wasn't that he saw her, it was that she saw him. Outside, the chants grew louder. Inside, two lives quietly changed direction. They didn't know it yet, but the glass city that once protected him was about to test him. Because the moment you start to see people, you can never unsee them again. The storm didn't end overnight, it only changed color. By morning, headlines crawled across every screen like fractures spreading through glass. Corruption, fraud, displacement. The same tower that once mirrored the sky now reflected its own scandal. The city that once looked up to Adrian Vale was ready to tear him down. He didn't panic. He didn't explain. He just closed his office door, as if silence could keep the world out. But the world doesn't wait, not for anyone. That afternoon, his reflection looked unfamiliar. Not a man of power, but the first sketch of weakness. The armor he'd worn for years was still there, but it had begun to rust. The board wanted a name to blame. The investors wanted a villain to crucify. And the same people who once quoted his speeches about dignity and progress now whispered about poetic justice. He'd built an empire out of logic, and now logic couldn't save him from the oldest thing of all, emotion. By noon, the upper floors were empty. The media blackout had turned the building into a ghost shell. But on the lower levels, someone kept working, Mira. While executives wiped files and rehearsed excuses, she polished the hallway floors, one quiet square at a time. The corridors that once echoed with ambition now held only the rhythm of her mop wheels and the hush of her breath. Sometimes the only souls left standing are the ones no one ever saw. Adrian stepped from the elevator, no assistant, no entourage, no shield. The air smelled faintly of lemon and resolve. He followed the scent until he found her, bent over a brass handrail, polishing until the reflection shone clear enough to hold truth. "Don't you have anywhere else to be, Mira?" "The building still stands, sir. That's reason enough to keep it clean." Her words weren't naive. They were steady, honest. And for the first time, her simplicity didn't offend him. It steadied him. He leaned against the wall, tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. "Do you always believe in fixing what's already broken, Mira?" "If I didn't, I'd be out of a job." It wasn't humor. It was truth disguised as kindness. He watched her move, focused, graceful, whole in a way he had forgotten how to be. And he understood something simple. Power is loud. Strength is silent. By morning, the storm turned personal. His investors froze his accounts. Reporters unearthed letters from his late father's failures. And for the first time, the city saw him not as untouchable, but alone. He arrived early, yet even the receptionist's smile had changed. Pity where admiration used to live. Mira was in the lobby, polishing marble that mirrored the darkness beneath his eyes. When he passed, she didn't bow or hide. She simply said, "Mira, you didn't sleep. You notice everything, don't you? Mira, only what needs care. He wanted to push back, to rebuild that wall of cold efficiency, but exhaustion left him unarmed. The armor didn't fit anymore. They stood in silence. The hum of the city filled the space between their breaths. For once, silence didn't feel empty, it felt understood. Then she said something that would echo long after she'd gone. Mira, even glass can heal, if the light passes through it right. He didn't answer, but somewhere inside, a part of him shifted, the smallest crack turning toward light. By week's end, half his empire had vanished. Projects frozen, investors gone, his assistant resigned by email. Polite, detached. For the first time in years, Adrian Vale walked into his office and heard nothing. No phones, no footsteps, no proof that he mattered. He sat there, watching city lights tremble on the rain-soaked glass. Then, a knock. Soft, hesitant. Mira. Sir, may I come in? Why? Mira. There's a leak in your ceiling vent. It could ruin the wood. She entered quietly, careful not to track mud across the carpet. She placed a metal bucket beneath the slow drip, then looked up. In the reflection of the window, the city looked dim, like it too had forgotten how to shine. Mira. You should go home, sir. This is home. Mira. No, sir, this is a building. Homes need heartbeats. He had no reply, because she was right. He hadn't heard a heartbeat in this place for years. She turned to leave, but before she reached the door, do you ever get tired cleaning up after people like me? Mira. Sometimes. But I remind myself, messes don't mean bad people, they mean people trying to live. When she left, the silence stayed, but it sounded different now. Not hollow. Healing. Days passed. The world moved on to its next scandal, but Adrian couldn't move past the quiet truths she'd left behind. He began to notice again. The janitor's cough at dawn, the way sunlight fell across the plants she watered. Little lives that kept the building alive. He started walking to work instead of being driven. The city looked different when you weren't above it. One morning, he saw her outside the staff entrance, feeding pigeons with crumbs from her lunch. She smiled at the smallest one, the one missing a feather. You feed them every day? Mira. They come back every day. That's reason enough. Her kindness wasn't charity. It was habit, the kind that doesn't ask to be seen. And he realized he'd spent his life building towers, but never built something like that inside himself. Weeks slipped by, and people began whispering again. But this time, the tone had changed. The arrogant CEO was different now. He greeted security guards. He ate once with his staff in the cafeteria. And one night, when the elevator broke, he helped Mira carry her supplies. He didn't do it for reputation. He did it because for the first time in years, he wanted to understand. Mira, you don't seem like someone who carries mops often. Everyone starts somewhere. Maybe I just started late. They laughed, a sound the building hadn't heard in months. Small, fleeting, real. By month's end, the Vale Meridian Tower no longer hummed with victory. It whispered. The laughter of investors had thinned into the nervous click of keyboards, the soft ping of unanswered emails, the hollow echo of doors closing behind those who'd found safer exits. Adrian Vale, the man who once commanded silence, now lived inside it. He still arrived before dawn, not to conquer the day, but simply to survive it. He would sit by the window, hands folded, eyes on a skyline he once believed he owned. Lately it looked like it belonged to someone else, someone gentler, someone he didn't yet know how to be. Outside, rain had become his reflection, endless, familiar, impossible to hold. And then one morning, it stopped. When he stepped into the lobby that day, the air smelled like wet earth and lemon polish. Mira was already there, sleeves rolled, hands wringing out a mop, humming a tune so soft it could have been the memory of a song. He paused longer than usual, letting that sound touch the silence he carried. What's that song? Something my mother used to sing on night shifts. Said it kept the sadness out of her hands. Sadness out of her hands. He kept turning the line over all morning, the way you roll a small stone in your palm, hoping it reveals what you've missed. Because sadness has a way of living in us. Sometimes in what we say, sometimes in the work we do to keep from saying it. By noon, he fainted. No warning, no pain, just the sudden weight of too many sleepless nights and too much coffee pretending it could be courage. He crumpled near the executive hall, contracts feathering out of his hands and skittering across marble like startled birds. Panic pricked the air. Someone shouted for medics. The assistant's voice broke into orders that couldn't stand. Mira was closer. She was already moving, kneeling beside him, voice steady while everyone else reached for fear. "Mira, sir, can you hear me?" He didn't. His breath came shallow. His pulse a broken rhythm under a watch that had always kept perfect time. She loosened his tie, eased his head into her lap, and, without thinking, hummed the morning's tune again, as if sewing a torn seam with sound. When the medics arrived, they found her there, uniform damp from kneeling in the spill, eyes refusing to leave the man the city had decided not to believe in. Sometimes, salvation shows up dressed as service. He woke to white light and the thin, clean taste of oxygen. A hospital band clung to his wrist, his first in decades. He turned his head. Mira sat in the corner with a paper cup of tea, hands wrapped around the heat like she was keeping it safe for both of them. "You stayed. Mira, someone had to tell them you were still human." He almost smiled. It left him as breath instead. The doctors called it exhaustion. Collapse from pressure measured in months. He was ordered to rest. But for a man who had defined himself by motion, rest felt like punishment. 2 days later, with forms signed and silence learned in small doses, he was discharged. Outside, the air was honest cold, each exhale drawing truth in pale lines. "Mira, you shouldn't come back to work so soon. You shouldn't tell your boss what to do. Then I'll tell a friend." That word, friend, hung between them like first light after a storm. He hadn't earned it. He didn't reject it. It just lived there, delicate and alive. Weeks passed. For the first time in his adult life, Adrian listened more than he spoke. He watched Mira thread her way through the halls, humming, mending, returning things to honest alignment. He started helping without announcement. A door hinge oiled, a temperamental lamp coaxed awake. Once, he reopened the elevator panel and fixed the antique music system she'd teased him about, the one that made the ride feel less lonely. They talked, but only as much as the night could hold. About her village, where mornings rose in fog instead of traffic. About his childhood drawings of skylines, a boy convinced clouds were a destination. Each conversation peeled away another layer until silence stopped being a wall and became a chair they shared. It wasn't love. Not yet. It was something rarer. Recognition. Two people who had learned to hide their cracks, finally seeing them reflected, and not looking away. Then, one evening, she didn't come. The halls felt wrong without her rhythm. The building seemed too big for its bones, too clean, too quiet. He pretended he wasn't waiting. Midnight told the truth. He called security. Had Mira clocked in? She hadn't. That night he didn't sleep. The silence he used to worship turned on him, a cathedral with the lights off. By morning, she returned, paler than usual, smile small but sincere. "Where were you?" "My landlord. He fell behind on rent. They were evicting him. I helped him pack." "You shouldn't have to do that." "Someone had to." There it was again, that answer stitched with steel and grace. He wanted to ask more, but she changed the subject with mercy disguised as practicality. Had he eaten? He hadn't. She left a small sandwich on his desk, wrapped in foil like care folded into a corner. Later, when he opened it, a note slipped out, neat handwriting, steady and shy. "Don't let the world harden what's still kind inside you." He didn't know yet, but that sentence would become a lifeline, something to hold when the past dragged like undertow. Days bled into nights, and their friendship deepened in the spaces between words. Adrian began to rebuild, not his empire, himself. He reopened foundation projects, rerouted funds to families displaced by old decisions, walked sites in scuffed shoes, and listened to people where once he would have presented to them. The city started to see him differently, not as the man above the glass, but as the man finally walking beneath it. Mira's influence wasn't loud. That's why it reached so far. Every decent choice he made carried a thread of her patience through it. One evening, he found her in the small rooftop garden, forgotten by architects and loved by wind. She stood near the edge, the skyline lit like a soft confession. He joined her. They let the city's hush do the talking.
Do you ever think about leaving? Every day. But not yet. Not until I finish what I came here to do. And what's that? Remind people that broken things can still serve a purpose.
He wanted to tell her she'd already done that she'd reminded him, the most broken of all. The words lodged behind the truth of it. He chose the shape that fit his mouth. You've changed me, Mira. Maybe you were never meant to be who you thought you were. She smiled, gentle, forgiving, and for the first time in his life, Adrian Vale didn't feel the need to win. He felt the desire to stay. The moment held, warm, easy, until his phone buzzed. A message, one line, no name. You still owe for what you did in Fenway. Some debts don't die. The past had found his number. He looked up at the glass. The reflection trembled, not for rain this time, but from the kind of fear that remembers its own origin. And beneath that quiet sky, he understood. Every bridge he'd built from silence was about to be tested by fire. The city of mirrors would not negotiate. It would ask one question and wait forever for the answer. Who are you, when no one believes the new story yet? He slid the phone into his pocket. The garden breathed. The skyline pretended not to stare. Beside him, Mira kept her eyes on the horizon, like a lighthouse, not taking credit for the boats that made it home. He would try to cross that bridge, not with power, not with polish, with the one thing he'd learned from a woman who could keep sadness out of her hands: presence. For weeks, the message wouldn't leave him. It was only one line, cold, deliberate, but it echoed louder than any scandal ever had. You still owe for what you did in Fenway. Some debts don't die. No name, no signature, just history, returning in pixels. But Adrian didn't need to guess. He knew which ghost had learned how to text. Fenway. The word alone tasted like rust. It was the project that had made his empire untouchable and his conscience unlivable. Hundreds of families displaced. Promises rewritten as contracts. A deal sealed with lies dressed in expensive suits. He'd told himself it was progress. Back then, everything cruel had been called progress. But now, as light from the skyline fractured across his desk, he saw faces where there used to be numbers. And maybe that's why the message didn't scare him. It didn't threaten. It reminded. That night, focus became a myth. His hands trembled when he touched paper. His reflection looked older and his thoughts darker. Then 3 knocks at the door. He expected his assistant. Instead, it was Mira, standing in the doorway, uniform dusted with flour, the faint smell of vanilla following her in. You've been baking? The kitchen staff were throwing out pastries. I thought, you might eat something that isn't black coffee. He blinked, as if kindness required translation. She placed a small paper box on the desk. The scent of cinnamon softened the sterile air. You look like someone trying to fight ghosts with spreadsheets. Maybe I am. She didn't laugh. She didn't pry. She just stayed, quiet, steady, the kind of presence that made even silence feel less cruel. Rain traced patterns on the window. For a long time, that was the only sound between them. Then, as if testing his own voice, he said, "Do you think people deserve second chances?" "Only if they understand the first one." Her answer landed like light on still water, small ripples reaching everywhere. He nodded, almost to himself. The next morning, he began calling people he'd spent years avoiding: journalists, lawyers, families displaced by Fenway. He offered apologies, compensation, rebuilding plans. The city didn't believe him, not at first. Redemption isn't news until it hurts enough to be real. But Mira believed him. She could see it wasn't for cameras or credit. It was for peace. A week later, as he stepped outside the tower, a black sedan idled near the curb. From its shadows emerged a man wrapped in rain and memory. "Didn't think I'd see you again, Vale." The voice froze him. Once his business partner, the man who'd taken the fall when Fenway collapsed. 10 years of silence, 10 years of anger, and now both standing on the same wet pavement. "What do you want, Derek?" "Closure. You built your kingdom on my grave. Time to pay rent." Adrian didn't move, but inside the old arrogance and the new guilt tore at each other. Two wolves fighting for one heart. "You think I don't know what I did? Knowing isn't the same as bleeding for it." He turned and left, coat cutting through the rain. But his words lingered like smoke that didn't know how to disappear. That night, the glass tower no longer felt safe. It felt like a cage made of reflections he didn't recognize anymore. The next day, Adrian did something entirely unlike himself. He followed someone. Not for business, for peace. He waited outside a small apartment block, its walls chipped, its single window glowing gold in the dusk. When Mira stepped out, groceries in hand, she spotted him immediately. "You followed me." "I wanted to make sure you're safe." "From what? The neighborhood or yourself?" She saw through him, as always. They walked side by side beneath flickering neon. He told her everything: Derek, Fenway, the message. And for the first time, his voice cracked beneath the weight of honesty. "I hurt people. Good people. I thought success could erase it, but it just buried it alive. And now it's digging its way back. I deserve it. Maybe. But sometimes pain isn't punishment. It's the only teacher left." Her words didn't soothe him. They freed him. Something inside loosened, like glass finally breathing after a storm. When they reached her door, she hesitated, hand on the knob, voice wrapped in hesitation. "Adrian, there's something you should know." The air shifted. The rain paused mid-air, listening. "What is it?" "Fenway. My family was one of the ones displaced." The world tilted. The noise of the city vanished. Cars, wind, even fought. Only her voice remained, steady, brave, trembling under old wounds. "I was 16. My father begged your company for time. They said policy wouldn't allow it. We lost our home the next week. He never recovered. My mother worked herself sick trying to start over. And when she died, I came here. Not for revenge. I just wanted to understand why." The confession didn't just hurt. It undid him. Not trust, because they hadn't built that yet, but illusion. The version of himself he'd tried to forgive. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I needed to know if there was still a man worth telling." He leaned against the wall, the weight of truth pressing down until pride couldn't breathe. His empire, his title, his armor, all suddenly too small to hold what he felt. She didn't cry. She'd already lived through the tears. She just looked at him, waiting for the truth to mean something. "I'm sorry." "Don't say it like an apology. Say it like a vow." And he did. He promised not to rebuild the old world, but to repair the one he'd broken. The Fenway rebuild began quietly, not as an announcement, but as atonement. Mira refused the spotlight, but became the quiet force that kept it honest. Forgiveness didn't come easily, but something stronger did: understanding. Still, their connection had changed. Now that the truth was spoken, every silence between them carried both ache and awe. Love didn't enter like sunrise. It flickered in like candlelight, small, trembling, unwilling to die. Weeks later, he found her where it all began, on the rooftop garden. The skyline spread before them like a promise finally kept. "You could hate me, Mira. You have every right to. I did, for a long time. But hate's heavy. It makes you carry the person you're trying to let go of." She turned toward him, eyes calm, not cold. He reached out, not for her hand, but for her permission. And now? Now I think maybe you were meant to build something different this time. Something human. The wind brushed a strand of her hair across her face, and without thinking, he tucked it gently behind her ear. Such a small gesture. But for a man who had spent years building walls, it was the bravest thing he'd ever done. They stood in the orange afterglow, the city breathing softly beneath them. Neither spoke. They didn't have to. Because forgiveness doesn't always sound like words. Sometimes it's just two people standing in the same light again. But even in peace, they knew the story wasn't over. Because when love grows from broken ground, the earth still remembers where it cracked. The city woke differently that morning. The rain had finally stopped. Streets shimmered with light, and the air carried that rare scent, the one that only comes after forgiveness. Months had passed since the night on the rooftop. The Fenway rebuild had begun quietly, brick by brick, family by family. Adrian Vale, once the name printed across headlines and glass towers, now walked through mud, shoulder to shoulder with the people his empire had once forgotten. He didn't wear suits anymore. He wore rolled sleeves, scuffed boots, and hands that finally looked like they belonged to a man who worked for others, not above them. He spoke less, listened more, and he was learning the sound of gratitude that didn't need applause. Mira was there too, never in front, always beside him. Together they helped rebuild homes, plant gardens, restore trust, the kind of trust that no currency could buy. Sometimes when he caught her across the site, hair tied back, sunlight tangled in the strands, her face streaked with dust and grace, he felt something deep inside him finally heal. It wasn't the kind of love that arrives like thunder. It was the kind that stays, like light filtering through cracked glass, patient and real. One night, when the last hammer had gone quiet, Adrian lingered. He stood before the final house, freshly painted, pale white against a sky washed with gold. His hand brushed the doorway. For the first time in years, he didn't see a transaction. He saw a home. Behind him, Mira's voice drifted through the dusk. "You did it. We did it. You didn't have to. Most people in your place would have just moved on. That's just it. I wanted to move on. But you taught me something. You don't move on from the past. You redeem it." She smiled, that quiet kind of smile that means, "I understand." They sat together on the low stone wall near the garden. Fireflies shimmered between them, tiny lanterns of forgiveness floating in the dark. No words, just quiet, because sometimes silence says it all. The next morning, the city woke to a headline: "The man who fixed what he broke." The article showed photos of Adrian handing keys to new homeowners, his face unguarded, his smile simple, unposed. He didn't care for praise, but he did print one copy. Not for himself, for Mira. He left it on her cleaning cart, folded neatly, with a note tucked beneath the page. "You were right. Homes need heartbeats. Thank you for giving mine back." When she read it, she didn't cry. She simply closed her eyes and whispered something that sounded a lot like peace. Time moved, as it always does, but this time it didn't erase. It rebuilt. Vale Meridian no longer chased stock prices. It chased purpose. One of the upper floors became a community workspace, open to anyone who wanted to learn, build, or dream. The glass tower, once a mirror of arrogance, now reflected life again. And in that reflection, the city could finally see people, not profits. Mira still worked there, but her uniform had changed. No longer a maid, she now wore a badge that read, Director of Outreach. Her role wasn't to clean the floors anymore. It was to help others rise from them. One morning, she found Adrian standing by the same window where they'd first met. The skyline glittered ahead, and the air carried that strange stillness of peace fulfilled. "Still staring at yourself?" "No. This time, I'm looking through." She joined him, side by side. Their reflections merged into the same light. As the sun climbed higher, the glass caught fire, gold and radiant. For a moment, the entire tower seemed to glow from within. The same tower that once stood as a monument to ego now stood as proof that people can change. And if you looked close enough, you'd see two silhouettes, a man learning how to love and a woman who'd already mastered it. Because love doesn't arrive to complete you. It arrives to heal you, piece by piece, until the person you were finally meets the person you were meant to be. On the anniversary of the rebuild's completion, they stood once again on the rooftop, the place where everything had broken and everything had begun. Funny, isn't it? I used to think this city was mine. It was never yours. You just had to open the window to see it. They didn't need promises or declarations, just presence. Two souls who found redemption, not in perfection, but in the simple act of staying. As the sun sank below the skyline, Adrian reached for her hand, no hesitation this time. And for once, the city didn't look cold, it looked alive. Because somewhere between arrogance and humility, between guilt and forgiveness, between silence and love, they found home.